Hello everyone, my name is Sorati Kadir and I am so excited to welcome you to OMN's new English program where I'm going to be your host. Today we are joined by Dr. Henok Gabbisa, an observer and analyst of Oromo and Ethiopian politics, to talk about the recent events in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and other developments regarding the prospects of peace in Oromia. Welcome Henok, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarati, for having me.
Dr. Henok, I want to begin by talking about the recent events in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. In your view, what do you think the political significance of the recent schism is? And with the recent announcement that other nations and nationalities also want to make a similar move, can you make any connections between these developments and what we have seen unfold over the last 4+ years in Ethiopia?
Well, thank you, Sarati, again. In my opinion, the ongoing religious movement within the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is probably one of the biggest movement in Ethiopian history, and there is a reason why I said this. As we know, any kind of political movement in Ethiopia in the last 60 to 50 years have been purely targeting a change of regime or a change of law or some kind of non-divine system. But right now that there is a spiritual element and religious element in what looks like the unraveling of the core of the Ethiopian state makes this one so different. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church is the core and at the center of the Ethiopian state building project from many, many years ago, from over 150 years ago. As we know, historically, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims a supreme spiritual authority, a supreme institutional and administrative authority way beyond than the sovereignty of the state. Yes, I understand religious institutions do have their own spiritual supremacy that connects them with God or connects them with their creators. But the way the Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims its own divine authority is in a way that the church is the owner of the state. The church is the one that guides the Ethiopian state because the church claims that it precedes the existence of the Ethiopian state. And in some situations, we've seen narratives where the church is not supposed to be bound by the rules and regulations of the state because it precedes the state. The church has been in existence way before the state of the Ethiopian of Ethiopia. So that gives the church to have some sort of supremacy in anything that they do, whether that's divine activities or non-divine activities. So now when we see movements or an introduction of different ideas and agendas, whether that's about respect for language or expansion of evangelical projects in different languages, these are things that the church has not been used to. The church was used to a single narrative of supremacy in one language, in one monolithic political view, which does not fare well with the reality of Ethiopian nation's nationality, which is multicultural, multilinguistic, multi approach to understanding spirituality. That's one source. So what we saw in the last 4 days and the potential for a disaster, situation has its own source, has its own historical and spiritual source, and that's what people need to understand. The other point that I, want to make about this is we have to also understand that the Ethiopian government has its own, project and goal in this movement. While the goal of, making sure that the church reflects the reality of the reality of diversity on the ground is something that should be supported. As we know, politicians always take advantage of opportunities and things that occur, right? And they take advantage in a way that does not resolve, the conflict within the church. We've seen here and there that the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has been, riding on this project or on this agenda towards his own goal. Uh, how are these things going to help the church, right? How are these things going to help the new group, the nations nationalities group that is now resisting against the monolithic doctrine in the country or in the church, to get what they deserve. What they deserve, in my opinion, is the basic right to worship in their language, the basic right, not to be insulted by the doctrine and things of that nature. And also, most importantly, and this is very crucial and that people should know, is the originality of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church is something that's based on a belief system and order that's Oromophobic. And in fact, it does not recognize the spiritual existence of other nations and nationalities. And I can mention an example for this. The liturgical books or the doctrinal books that the church writes and distributes for its own evangelical purpose, like, for example, the Book of David and the Revelation of Mary, these are at the core of the doctrinal source of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Millions and millions of members of the church read this book on a daily basis. And these are the books that carry things like, anti-Oromo spiritual narratives. What do I mean by anti-Oromo spiritual narratives? There is a Bible. The Bible is at the higher level of, providing us the Word of God. And supposedly the Bible is the Word of God, which it is. And then there are these books, such as the Book of David that I was mentioning earlier, and the Revelation of Mary, that has been written by the church to help reinterpret the Bible. The authority, the spiritual authority, and the doctrinal status of these books are next to the Bible. And millions of the church members read this book every day. In one of the books, which interprets about Sodom and Gomorrah, which is the homosexual phenomenon in the Bible, it takes the Oromo as an example of monster group of people who gang rape or who does Sodom and Gomorrah to other people. So in the Bible, there's nothing about Oromo, but the church prepares its own book that interprets the Bible. And in its book, it uses the Oromo and the other nations and nationalities, and in fact, the Islam, as an example of evil, right? That gang rapes a lady in that verse, in that particular verse. I'm not exactly sure which verse this is, but this is in the Genesis 1, Genesis verse 1 from 9 to 19, where it talks about Sodom and Gomorrah. So this book was planned, written, and prepared and distributed by the church. And it uses Oromo Islam. They call Shankala, most of more darker skinned people, and they gang rape a lady in that verse. So now when millions of people read this book, right, this is how they know Oromo. Oromo as a gang rapist. Shankala, or the many nations and nationalities of Ethiopia, as the source of evil, spiritual evil. And this has been in existence for the last many thousand years. So today, the movement that we see in the church comes from such a the degradation of spirituality and undignified perception about the identity of other nations and nationalities. So that's why we need to go beyond beyond the appearance or beyond the face value of this thing, and understand what is the source of this. And that's what I want to mention.
Thank you, Henok. I certainly learned a lot of things that I didn't know from that response. And Henok, I'm curious to know, as I'm just hearing that there has been a reconciliation between the people who have led the formation of this new synod and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Now, if this is the case, and if this does result in the new synod returning to the body of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, do you think that the impacts of what has happened over the last week, 2 weeks, precedes? Do you think that the impacts of what has happened over the last 1-2 weeks has actually already grounded itself in, I guess, the fabric of Ethiopia, the conversations that have been had? Or what would the significance of a return of the new synod to the old, or to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church mean in the context of all that's happened?
I believe in the last few days or week, what we saw has already laid bare, the racist nature of the church. It has already created a very wide awareness and consciousness among the followers of the church and among the believers or non-believers. It has already achieved a great deal of, elevating the consciousness in the church and outside of the church, and that's a big success. But on the other hand, even if we assume that the group, the Oromia and other nations, nationalities, clergy, successfully depart from the church, this doctrinal problem is not going to get resolved overnight or over weeks. It's going to take a reshuffling of psychology, from its own members to undo what the institution has done to them for the last thousands of years. So that they just got reconciled, got back to the church, and reconciliation has happened. That's great for them. I mean, if that can resolve things, if the reconciliation can resolve the doctrinal crisis, the spiritual crisis in the institution, that's really great. And in fact, I know for a fact that the Oromia and other nations and nationalities synod really did not want to secede from the church. They want to maintain, the institution. They want to be part of the existing patriarchal order. They just want to be part of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo Church. But what they want is that the administration and the spirituality needs to reflect who we are. When, as a Christian, I know that Jesus Christ came on earth and spoke to people in their language, and Jesus Christ reflected the culture and the identity of the people that he was speaking to. And there is no reason why the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was built on degrading the identity, the culture, and the language of Oromo, and claims that millions of the followers are from Oromo. And that's ungodly kind of doctrine. That's against the faith and belief system of any decent religion. So the breaking news of, the Oromo synod getting back to the Orthodox Church it's great, and that's what we originally want. But what we want is, or what the Christianity totally want is, nobody should be hiding under the doctrine of the church and claiming supremacy of, religious narratives in a way that degrades others. For example, the Oromo, or the Islam, or the Shankilla, or any other. So if the reconciliation can resolve this crisis, this is a great success. But I don't know what terms and conditions was being offered by who in making the reconciliation successful. But if you ask me, in reality, I do not really believe for a second that this is going to end right here. This does not even start yet. And we know that it's not the right time for the country. The country is just coming out of a deadly, tragic kind of war where roughly over a million human lives have been claimed in both northern and south in Oromia. And now another headache here. And then there is the Africa Union meeting coming up in the country. So this is a simple postponement or adjournment of what has been started. And it's just a total fabrication of reconciliation. It's not going to stop here. And that's my sincere opinion about this.
Thank you so much, Henok. I'm also getting some clarity on this event, and that it is a discussion that has begun between the clergy members of the new synod and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So we'll hear more in upcoming programs and news as to where this goes and what it results into. I thank you very much for the response to both of those questions. Henok, the European Institute of Peace recently issued an apology addressed to the Oromo Liberation Army's High Command for naming the army as responsible for the Tole massacre in its draft report, The Potential for Peace in Western Oromia. What is the significance of this apology being issued, and how, in your view, should interested and invested international bodies aim to engage the many competing narratives that are present about what is really going on in Oromia?
I really want to, congratulate the director or the person who issued this apology. This is unheard of. This is probably the first of its kind where a major international institution took the step to apologize for what could have been a disastrous distortion of narratives and reality. And as far as I'm concerned, being in this space for probably the last decade and more than that, and when international community institutions make glaring mistakes, which are even obvious, they do not want to take the step to apologize. They sometimes want to stick to their reality or narrative, which has been wrongly framed. And this probably for me is the first of its kind, and we need to appreciate that. And that's what, an institution that's dedicated to, resolving issues and becoming a source of policy should be familiar with if they just want to continue in this space. And European Institute of Peace is one of the biggest source of foreign policy at the European level and even at the North American level. So that has to be commended seriously. And I'm sure the Oromo people would know about this. Having said that, we also have to see what does this mean for the interaction between the foreign policy community and the community, the political community in Ethiopia or the Oromo. And we know that foreign policy is always shaped and guided by, things like what the European Institute of Peace does or the U.S. Institute of Peace does. They do research, they analyze the research, they present the research, and they distribute their research to the government bodies, to foreign policy institutions, to State Department, and things of those nature. So foreign policy, European foreign policy or American foreign policy on Ethiopia or on Oromo starts from this kind of institutions. European Union foreign policy, whether that's a single country policy or collective foreign policy at European level, starts from the institutions such as the European Institute of Peace. If this much degree of wrongness or mistake can be committed at the European Peace Institute, if we can see that, you can imagine the real blind spot of foreign policy. And this has been going on for the last 50, 60 years. And the Oromo movement for freedom is not only about, liberating itself from the yoke of, the domestic political problem, but also to inform the world community, the international community, the reality and the truth about their cause, the pure nature of freedom in Oromia. And many institutions did not understand this for many reasons. One, people who do research for these kind of institutions and people who collect data are either unprofessionals, or if they're professionals, they are incapable, incompetent, and most importantly, they might be pro-government individuals. I'm not saying that pro-government individuals should not be doing research, but you need to be non-sectarian. If you're a researcher and you're collecting data, you need to maintain your neutrality as much as possible. That's the ethics of academics, the ethics of scholarship, and the ethics of the protocol of research. And I'm sure there are a few bunch of people on the ground who collect data for the institute, and people who are not capable, people who are sectarian, people who are, who probably might have some kind of vengeance against different entities or organizations in this space. And the vetting system of the European Institute, the Peace of Institute, is so weak that they are capable of producing that much flawed research that blames one group, wrongly blames one group for a massacre of thousands of people. Tole massacre has been one of the bloody massacres that took place in Wolaga in the past year. There is no way that a highly funded research institution, such as the European Peace Institute, would make a mistake about this public event, let alone an institution that's being funded by millions and millions of dollars or millions of European currency. An individual researcher or a mere PhD student or candidate shouldn't be making a mistake about this massacre. There is no way you would just get it wrong. A single PhD candidate, let alone an institution such as European Institute of Peace. And this showed me how rigged the system of foreign policy is at the source level, at the local level. So who are their researchers? Who are their analysts? Who are their experts? They need to rethink that. They need to vet that these people are purely professional, neutral, and capable. And without being incapable, without being incompetent, and without being, partisan about this, there is no way the European Institute would make this problem. And I'm glad that they made a correction and took steps to apologize. And most importantly, what is it going to look like in the future? Are they just going to repeat the same problem? Are they just going to, continue to, be the real and the true source of foreign policy? That's something that remains to be seen. But at this moment, I personally applaud them. I'm sure the Oromo people would applaud them for taking steps to apologize. But they need to distribute very well to their circle about the apology as well. And that's what can be said about this.
Thank you, Dr. Henok, for that comprehensive response. Finally, Dr. Henok, I want to ask, after the signing of the ceasefire and the peace agreement in Tigray, there have been calls to replicate the process in Oromia, and calls that feel somewhat rushed. In its recently released brief manifesto, the Oromo Liberation Army also stated that it is interested and it is willing to sit for these peace talks. But how, in your opinion, should the framework and understanding of a peace process be different or perhaps the same as what we saw in Tigray?
I am unfortunately skeptical about the peace in Oromia, which is tragedy, because we need to put together the flow of patterns in the last few years in Oromia. I'm very glad that a glimmer of hope is coming to northern part, to Tigray, that there is some sense of return of life and daily existence, somehow a peaceful existence in Tigray. That's very great for the people of Tigray and beyond. I wish the same thing comes in Oromia. And for two reasons. One, the story of war and conflict in Oromia has been that much distributed or not that much known in the international community or even in the country. And people are just being killed in the dark, in the vacuum, without even us knowing who these people are. There is a daily, Oromia has become a location of death. At this moment, Oromia is a location of death, and nobody knows about it. And so the recent manifesto that has been offered by the OLA is something that has to be taken seriously by both international community and by the Ethiopian government, if and only if they are interested in a real and genuine peace. But I am skeptical about the Ethiopian government's interest in peace. And why am I skeptical about this? For me, it might sound weird or odd. I believe that the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed wants OLA to remain its current guerrilla status. If OLA remains in its guerrilla status perpetually for a long time, Abiy Ahmed would use this as a source of policy that he uses to drive his interaction with other nations and nationalities, particularly with the Amhara. And in 2018, end of 2018 and 19, when things fall apart, we've been calling for a roundtable peace negotiation between OLA and the government. And the government was not interested. The government was not interested in 2018 and 2019, and the government is not really interested right now. The only way that the Ethiopian government is willing to sit down and strike some kind of deal is if and only if OLA becomes a power to reconcile with. At this point, I don't know much about OLA other than what I usually hear on social media or on any other media. Peace would only come when these two forces are a real threat to each other. I don't know if one force is a real threat to the other at this point. And so the Ethiopian government might act like they're interested in peace, but they are not interested in peace, in making a deal with Oromia, particularly with OLA, because they might get more political benefit, marginally speaking, they might get more political benefit with OLA remaining in its conflict status, in its guerrilla status, than they would get from the peace deal. And here is how. So in the mind of the Ethiopian Prime Minister or the core Ethiopian politics, the core Ethiopian non-Oromo politics, they see Oromo nationalism and OLA as the radical version of Oromo movement. So they want to use OLA and the movement and the freedom of the freedom movement as a source of boogeyman in their engagement or relation with other nations and nationalities, particularly with the Amhara. We know that the Prime Minister would use OLA and the vision of OLA as a source of boogeyman or a source of radical Oromo nationalism. And he uses that radicalism, a fabricated radicalism, I would rather say, as a source of getting his base together in the Amhara. And literally what he might say is, if you do not want to accept the Prosperity Party, which is being led by Abiy Ahmed, as the true and authority over you, you're going to get this. You're going to get the radical version of the Oromo. I am a good Oromo. That's what the Prime Minister says. I am, well, he does not even claim Oromo, but when he has to, he claims that he is a subtle form of Oromo nationalist or something like that, or Shimali Sabdisa for that matter, right? And as long as that purpose is being served, I don't know if peace is a required commodity for the government. Peace is a required commodity for the Oromo people and for OLA, but I doubt if it's really a needed service or product for the government. Do the government even need peace with OLA? They do not, because they get more political benefit from this current situation than they would get from the peace. So as long as that mediocre mentality, that Machiavellian mentality is in place, I doubt if there will be a step forward.
Truly a very interesting analysis there, Dr. Henoch. I really want to thank you for your time and for sharing your insights with us today. And I look forward to talking to you again, hopefully in the future on this program.
Thank you very much, Soreti, and I look forward to talk to you again.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we will be back soon with future interviews and more content in English. My name is Soreti Kadir. I'm your host, and you are watching the Oromia Media Network.